Okay, hello. Welcome to part three. Brandeis part three, American Zionism and the Making of Israel. Hopefully you guys can hear me, see me. So Brandeis part three, American Zionism and the Making of Israel. Here's the cover shot. For whatever reason, my little toolbar is not disappearing, so it's a little annoying. You guys can't see that. But it covers these names here. So we're off to a flying start. So I've included some of these declarative sentences made by Brandeis. There is no inconsistency between loyalty to America and loyalty to Jewry. And let no American imagine that Zionism is inconsistent with patriotism. He wrote an article called Zionism and Patriotism that was very well known, well read, famous. And these two quotes are from The Jewish Problem, How to Solve It by Louis Brandeis. That's his own words. And it's at this time, I'm not sure if the time matches up, but we talked about this already, that Isaiah Bowman is put in charge of finding a Jewish homeland, but you can see that they'd already figured it out. They already knew where they were going. It was all largely just sort of a kabuki theater, because they'd already established the first settlements in Palestine as early as 1882, but beginning in 1920 and beyond, Brandeis and Rothschild team up. So we've got the two Rothschilds, most influential, Edmund de Rothschild and James Rothschild. So some of our sources come from the book by Simon Schama called Two Rothschilds and the Land of Israel. And then here's a line of Brandeis lieutenants. These guys are part of the Brandeis regime. And Jacob de Haas is the secretary. He was the secretary of Theodor Herzl and Brandeis. Okay. Aaron Aronson is somebody we're going to mention later. Horace Kalin is sort of the guy that grooms Brandeis. Nathan Strauss too. Okay, so these are the kind of historical artifacts we bring with the historical method. Try to have documents as high resolution as possible so you can zoom in and read. There's something blurred out that's not by me. Sure love to know what that says. You can see published in 1915. You're more than welcome to read that whole article. But that's what historical method does. That is what forensic history is. For us to use the most effective process to find the truth. So a non-practicing Jew who did not believe in religion, he became head of the American Zionist movement in his sixth decade and transformed it from a moribund sideshow into a powerful component of American life. Brandeis met with Woodrow Wilson for the very first time on August 28th, 1912 at Seagirt. We talked about this already in the previous show, to discuss Brandeis's reform ideas, meaning Brandeis met both Wilson and de Haas in the same month, just prior to Wilson's election to president. Seemingly coordinated both the rise of Wilson to the White House and Brandeis to the head of the Zionist Organization of America. De Haas proves to be a very able director and executive secretary for Brandeis's interests moving forward. So you can see, Brandeis is given the first responsibility of creating U.S. foreign policy. 1917, he hands it off to Walter Lippmann, and then that whole inquiry is led by Isaiah Bowman, which we've shown already in the first video. So that shows that there's sort of a coordinated effort here to create U.S. foreign policy, because these are intelligence agents. This is the precursor to the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA. And this is really where U.S. foreign policy is established during the Progressive Era, especially 1919 at the Paris Peace Conference. So Zionism, the rise of Israel, and the rise of U.S. foreign policy paralleling here at the same time. Brandeis' sudden interest in Zionism, according to the mainstream, was sparked by his first meeting with Jacob de Haas, August 13th, 1912. De Haas was personal secretary to the man mainstream will tell you is the father of Zionism, Theodor Herzl. De Haas moving to America on Herzl's suggestion, eventually settling in Boston near Brandeis around 1902. And while it is true that de Haas, the editor of the Boston Jewish Advocate and the Boston Jewish Chronicle newspapers, did inspire Brandeis with harrowing tales of both Lewis's Zionist uncle, Louis Naphtali Dembitz, and Theodor Herzl, Brandeis had long before been introduced to the Jewish problem. As early as November 28, 1905, 5 years before his meeting with de Haas, we see Brandeis expressing sympathy for Zionism in a speech he made at the New Century Club in Boston, commemorating the 250th anniversary of Jewish settlement, entitled What Loyalty Demands. So Brandeis had also publicly announced his sympathy for Zionism at least 2 years prior to his train station conversation with de Haas in an interview with the American Hebrew on December 2nd, 1910, while he's writing the Protocols of Peace and bringing together labor and capital. And a similar one on December 9th in de Haan's own, the Jewish Chronicle. And when asked whether he had interest in those working for a Jewish revival in Palestine, Brandeis replied, quote, I have a great deal of sympathy with the Zionists. The movement is an exceedingly deserving one. These so-called dreamers are entitled to the respect and appreciation of the entire Jewish people, end quote. So Brandeis joined the Federation of American Zionism, FAZ, and it's also here during this time while he was nearing his 60s that Brandeis changed his middle name in honor of his Zionist uncle from David to Dembitz. Kind of a strange time in the life of a U.S. Supreme Court justice to completely change your belief systems, especially religiously. Prior to this, Brandeis really wasn't religious at all. If there was any affiliation, it would have been to Reform Judaism, which is also called Progressive Judaism, by the way. So in August of 1914, Brandeis was elected chairman of the Provisional Executive Committee for General Zionist Affairs. That's International Zionism. And attends the first meeting of the American Jewish Congress. In March of 1915, Brandeis, along with Stephen Weiss and Julian Mack, would establish the Jewish Congress Organization Committee. On April 25th, 1915, Brandeis addresses the Eastern Council of Reform Rabbis, the Jewish problem and how to solve it. This is the speech that we included in the title page and talked about already. In January of 1916, 4 days before his nomination to the Supreme Court, he speaks at Carnegie Hall in New York. Jewish rights of the Congress. This is why there was an outrage about his nomination to the Supreme Court, because he was obviously compromised. It wasn't America first at all. So on April 23rd, he meets with Arthur Balfour to discuss British mandate in Palestine. In 1917, 2 months after America enters the World War, Brandeis is elected honorary chairman of the National Executive Committee of the AGC. So you can see Brandeis is very influential in the world of Zionism at this point, leads international Zionism, and then is on all kinds of boards, commissions, councils, directorates. So Brandeis and his lieutenants willingly involved themselves in many other lesser known but no less important Jewish organizations like the Jewish Agricultural Experiment Station. This now is where Aaron Aronson, another Rothschild agent since birth, the Rothschilds taught him. Brandeis, along with Mack, Marshall, Schiff, and Weiss, were all members of the advisory board of the Hebrew Sheltering and Immigrant Aid Society. To raise funding for the creation of Israel, Brandeis, Bernard Flexner, and Robert Zold brought together the Palestine Cooperative Company Incorporated with the Reconstruction Committee of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee to form the Palestine Economic Corporation. So the Palestine Cooperative Company and the Reconstruction Committee of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee is this group right here, and Brandeis led them. And when you look closely, you can see a Warburg and Jacob Schiff. And also here, this guy, he's important too. We've gone over him a little bit in either the Exhilarator or How Huxley Hijacked Hollywood or Hidden in the Shadow of the Sun. This is the Marxist conclaves in Hollywood, these political salons of which Aldous Huxley, Charlie Chaplin, and other famous Hollywood stars were all part of. Greta Garbo. And then here's a painting of the same moment. And because this guy, Louis Marshall, wasn't present for the picture, this is at least their official story for why they did a painting, was to include their buddy Louis Marshall. And he's very influential in the Zionist movement. He's another lieutenant of Brandeis. Another strange addition is this globe. So July 10th, 1918, meeting of the Joint Distribution Committee and the executives of the American Jewish Relief Committee at 52 William Street, New York. First is the actual photo, the second a painting commemorating the moment with the key addition of Louis Marshall behind Warburg and a globe for some reason now prominently displayed in the immediate foreground, along with several other alterations. Brandeis resigned from both of these committees by personal letter to Warburg, once confirmed as Supreme Court Justice, but we see clearly that the Brandeis regime is still controlling things from behind the scenes. So there's a list. Cyrus Adler is another very influential guy. I think that's who I pointed out earlier. I may be mistaken with his identity, but all very influential. You can see who they are. So the JDC distributed tens of millions to the early construction efforts in Palestine through the wartime donations of 3 distinct communities to supply capital and credit, assuming a credit structure where none had existed before. Its first prospectus stated that the company recognized that the extension of credit facilities was a first vital necessity in Palestine and of the utmost importance and of the utmost consequence in its economic upbuilding. So the American Jewish Committee targeted for funds already settled American Jews, while the Central Relief Committee looked to the new Jewish immigrant and the Union of Jewish Orthodox Congregations for funding, and the People's Relief Committee solicited Jewish labor and socialist groups like the Amalgamated Clothing Workers or the Federation of Jewish Farmers, etc. So you can see they're branching out, and they've got demographics or groups of people that they are specifically targeting to try to siphon money out to fund the creation of Israel. Meanwhile, these guys have more money than God. They could do it themselves. So Brandeis created the Palestine Economic Corporation with Bernard Flexner, Julius Simon, Robert Zold, Jacob Schiff, Felix M. Warburg, and other wealthy New York German Jews. Within that corporation were formed the necessary institutions and utilities to begin establishing the necessary infrastructure for a working Jewish community in Palestine. The Central Bank of Cooperative Institutions in Palestine Limited, the Economic Board for Palestine of London, the Palestine Jewish Colonization Association, that's the Rothschild angle, and they say colonization, by the way, in their title, and Palestine. Okay, you notice something here? They're naming their companies Palestine and using the word colonization. So, and Palestine Mortgage and Credit Bank Limited, the PEC, working in conjunction with both Baron de Rothschild's PICA and the Weitzman's Jewish Agency, constructed modern methods of agriculture at a time when industry was largely non-existent in the area. The PEC grew their pioneering country in such fields as credit for agricultural and industrial enterprise, housing, provision, town planning, and water supply. So you can see as early as 1920, so nearly 30 years before the creation of Israel, we have them already establishing the early Jewish settlements, largely aided by the first Jewish U.S. Supreme Court justice, working in conjunction with the House of Rothschild. And truth be told, we see the Rothschilds in the same area funding the establishment of settlements as early as the 1880s. So through their various subsidiaries, the PEC facilitated growth through credit programs, loans for low-cost housing in rural and urban areas. The PEC was deeply involved in questions regarding the country's water supply, making significant contributions to the supply problem by implementing improved technical methods and the establishment of centralized and systematic irrigation plants. The colony had been carefully planned by PICA in cooperation with the Palestine Economic Corporation and the Jewish Agency. Emphasis added. Page 284, two Rothschilds in the land of Palestine, Simon Schama. The historiography of American Zionism until 1930 may well be called Brandeis-centric. Brandeis, the man, his ideas, and his achievements are presented as the pinnacle of American Zionist realization during the first part of history. It is generally accepted that there was no organized Zionism in the United States until Brandeis assumed leadership in 1914, and that his hold on the movement continued at least until the beginning of 1921 in this famous, very public breaking away from Chaim Weizmann and the direction that he wanted to take Zionism. Okay, but up until that point, Chaim Weizmann is probably Brandeis' biggest fan. So after being nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1916, Brandeis wrote to Felix Warburg at the New York offices of the American Jewish Relief Committee, "I regret that I feel compelled to resign from the Executive Committee of the American Jewish Relief Committee and, of course, also from the Joint Distribution Committee to avoid negative public perception, yet Brandeis still very much wielded authority from behind the scenes with an invisible leadership." Okay, so I've just taken some of the provenance and thrown it on here so you can see that this is real. You got the author's name here if you wanted to go and research for yourself, which I highly recommend you do. Get in the habit of doing your own research. And we show this letter, the primary source, here in a bit. So through his closest lieutenants, Julian W. Mack, Stephen S. Wise, Bernard Flexner, Jacob de Haas, Felix Frankfurter, and Robert Zold, hereinafter referred to as the Brandeis Group, this inner hardcore group, were all American educated, a majority being also American born. All were university educated, most were lawyers, and most of the lawyers had attended Harvard. A majority also became Zionists after 1914. So Brandeis at least officially stepped down from all of his positions in Zionist and Jewish organizations to avoid embarrassing the Supreme Court, of which he had just become a member. He continued, however, to serve in an honorary capacity and henceforth exercised overall authority from behind the scenes. As head of the American Zionist movement, Brandeis did not and could not act alone, especially after his nomination to the Supreme Court in 1916, when, for technical reasons as well as matters of principle, his personal participation in the movement was limited. The Brandeis Group, sources at the bottom of the page. I've underlined some of the most sensitive information. I wonder if I put this quote in there. Should we read it? Brandeis Group provides an interesting subject for analysis. It included both a larger soft core, the 40 or so members of the Zionist administration who resigned, together with Brandeis and Mack at the Cleveland Convention in June 1921. This is the Brandeis Group resigns at this famous Cleveland Convention from the Zionist movement to allow Chaim Weizmann to take it in the direction he wanted. And also within this Brandeis Group, in addition to a soft core, these 40 or so members, there was a hardcore, a smaller group whose members were almost in daily letter contact with Brandeis. To this latter group belonged Julian W. Mack, Stephen S. Weiss, Bernard Flexner, Jacob de Haas, Felix Frankfurter, and Robert Zold. Close to the inner group, but not quite part of it, were Alexander Sachs, Benjamin V. Cohen, Horace M. Kalin, and perhaps also Norvin Lindheim. Now, Benjamin V. Cohen is involved with FDR's Brain Trust. He's one of the more famous names. And I don't think he's one of these clerks that we're going to get into. at some point. So here's some more historical artifacts. To prove that Louis Brandeis was the chairman of the Executive Committee for General Zionist Affairs, here's a poster advertising his speech or his address. The subject was the aims of the Zionist movement at the Hyperion Theater at 7:30, Sunday, May 9th, 1915. So through his associates, Brandeis held the Zionist organization in a tight grip. So from Louis Brandeis around World War I to Abba Hillel Silver after World War II, Zionism has been defined as a form of American liberalism. Okay? And that American liberalism that they're talking about isn't classical liberalism and our freedom to speak and think and assemble freely. It's progressive liberalism, neoliberalism, this new definition that these very men created at the Walter Lippmann Colloquium, 1938. This is one of the tricks that we must understand. So Balfour met with Brandeis on at least 2 occasions during his Washington visit, May 7th and 11th. And a large stack of contemporary scholarship concurs, as substantiated above by Ben Halpern, professor of Near East Studies at Brandeis University itself, that these meetings between Brandeis and Balfour were critical and served as a major coming together of Anglo-American relations. Brandeis and Balfour were careful not to debate first rights to self-determination between the Jew and the Arab on numerical grounds, as the Hebrew then, as now, grossly outnumbered in the region by his fellow Arab Semite. You see the conversations that they have. No, we can't ask for self-determination for the Jew in Palestine on numbers, because the Arab, today is 500 million strong, and the Hebrew is only 10 million. So it's an obviously faulty argument. If they were to take that path, they wouldn't have got their Jewish homeland at all. So they had to find another way. This centuries-old tradition of calling anyone critical of Israel or Zionism anti-Semitic a tired misnomer, in that there are over 70 languages associated on the Semitic branch, the largest spoken language, Arabic, Amharic, Tigrinya, and then Hebrew. So the Hebrew, as far as the 77 branches of Semitic-speaking people, is way down the list. Yet they stake claim to the whole tree when they say, you're being an anti-Semite. Right? It's actually them. If we wanted to argue on numbers, we would clearly say that Israel is actually the anti-Semite, and anything going on against the Arab there and the Palestinian is anti-Semitical, right? So another source here, Peter Beinart, The Crisis of Zionism. I've got it here somewhere. It is on my bookshelf. But another very important source. So when I find important sources online, I try to grab them in real life, because Walter Lippmann and these progressives are creating a pseudo environment that turned into the virtual reality. So for us to win and for us to keep our minds, we're going to have to hold on to some real physical evidence. So Brandeis is also one of the earliest to actively promote dual loyalty. We talk about how most members of Congress, if not all of them, have this dual loyalty to both America and Israel. This is where it starts, through a shared nationalism. And it was very influential on Balfour, wielding all the authority vested within him. Brandeis, an essential figure in the conception, promotion, and especially the consummation of the document most responsible for securing a final homeland for the Jew, the Balfour Declaration, which we've sort of shown at the beginning. And here's that document that I sourced from. Okay. It shows up clear if it's not on this program. So if you want to see it, I can get it to you. And that's, for those that don't know, that's Arthur Balfour. That's what the Balfour Declaration is named after. He's the Foreign Secretary of the British government. David Lloyd George's right-hand man. And if you've been watching the inquiry, especially the one in Paris, we have video footage of him there. So by the time Brandeis was confirmed U.S. Supreme Court Justice in the summer of 1916, he'd been the leader of the American Zionist movement for 2 years and a longtime intimate advisor to U.S. President Woodrow Wilson. 1916. He'd already gone through the first administration. And that New Freedom was written by Brandeis. So down the road we progress. As you would expect, Brandeis's words carried much weight in many influential circles. Brandeis inside a three-circle Venn diagram, uniquely positioned to press for a Jewish homeland, right? And that he was the leader of Zionism. He was a U.S. Supreme Court justice, but most importantly, an agent of Rothschild and the leader of Zionism, right? That's what I said. Advisor to the president, Rothschild agent, Zionist leader. So that three-circle Venn diagram, only one man stands in the middle of that, and that's Louis Dembitz Brandeis. So it is social justice which Zionism represents, and every bit of that is the American ideals of the 20th century, Louis Brandeis. So there you go. There's the hoodwink. And if what was happening there wasn't important, right? But we're seeing a literal genocide happening. As far as we're concerned, that's what we're seeing, because we know the history. And so maybe let's just go back to the top here for a second. This is the Balfour Declaration here. This is the founding document of Israel. And I popped this out because it may be the most important sentence you need to read in your life. Certainly it is sort of the contradiction of a century, right? It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Presently, they are pushing all of them out. So there's no respect for their civil and religious rights. They're trying to remove them from the very definition of what it is to be a Semite. They're trying to commandeer their whole existence. People need to, hate to say it, but, right? Is there an easy way to tell people they've lived an illusion their entire life? There isn't. But that's what's going on in Israel. And it all started because of the first U.S. Supreme Court justice. So immediately following Wilson's declaration of war on April 6, 1917, British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour led a diplomatic mission to Washington, landing on April 22nd, 1917. So this is all by boat. There's no planes yet. So you can see April 6th, and then a little over 2 weeks later, Balfour's landing in America, and it takes a few days for that trip. So it's nearly immediate. Almost like they knew that Wilson was going to declare war and join in the Great War. So officially, the Balfour mission was to promote wartime cooperation. But Balfour's visit was primarily financial, economic. This is what we're seeing. The true intentions of Balfour and the rest of his entourage, including the governor of the Bank of England, Walter Cunliffe, was to bring the Americans up to speed on the lucrative past of British imperialism. With the United States now a committed belligerent in the Great War, previous treaties and agreements made by the French and British in Italy, Africa, the Near East, and the other areas around the world had to be laid on the table. This is the colonial imperialist past, and all of the secret agreements around the world that the British and French have made. Well, they better let the Americans in on it if we're going to all go to war together. So, and it is in this light we see the depth to Brandeis's influence. Here's a picture of Chaim Weizmann, maybe seconds after he kissed Brandeis's hands. Brandeis, the eminent insider, while Chaim Weizmann was very much considered the outsider to Wilson's circle. So you can see Brandeis had what Chaim Weizmann wanted. So where Weizmann struggled to get access, even by repeated cable, Brandeis arrived as an invited and an eminent guest to the White House. Where Weizmann, because of his personality, hit serious diplomatic roadblocks, the people's attorney smoothed political and personal tensions. He's a master of arts, man. Clearly, it is because of Brandeis's influence on the American Zionist movement and American Jewry in general, groups whose blessings Weizmann desperately needed, that Brandeis became an integral figure, the sage advisor to all, even more so than Weizmann in the final drafting of the Declaration. So Brandeis's personal influence was doubly important, for he combined the roles of a Jewish leader and a close advisor of President Wilson. When Balfour came to the United States to consult his new allies shortly after America entered the war, the new British foreign minister made a point of meeting Brandeis. All contemporaries agree in regarding these meetings as being critical in opening up the last phase of the negotiations for a British pro-Zionist policy declaration. It's taken from page 71, Brandeis and the Origins of the Balfour Declaration, Ben Halpern. We've already talked about him. He's at Brandeis. So in many ways, I'd almost consider that a primary source, but it's secondary. So Dr. Weitzman gladly assented to the Brandeis project. He expressed his gratitude by impulsively kissing Brandeis's hand. Page 133, Brandeis, a biographical sketch, de Haas. It's written by Jacob de Haas, the secretary to both Herzl and Brandeis. So Weitzman launched a series of urgent pleas to his American contacts, and to Brandeis in particular, for their aid in a situation in which the future prospects of Zionism were critically involved. Weitzman pinned his hopes on Louis Brandeis as the person most capable of influencing President Wilson. That is, in fact, what happens. So when Balfour came to the United States to consult his new allies shortly after the Americans entered the war, I think I might have that quote in there twice. Yes. So Balfour met with Brandeis on at least 2 occasions during his visit. I think I have that in twice. It's worth repeating. So Brandeis and Balfour were careful not to debate first rights to self-determination between the Jew and the Arab, especially on numerical grounds. And I think I have this in there twice. Yes. Let's see how far I go repeating. Yeah, it's just those 3. So I'll remove those, and then it starts here. Balfour and Louis Brandeis, a Supreme Court justice and a leading American Zionist, came up with an ingenious solution. It was wrong to use mere numerical self-determination. A great many potential inhabitants of the Jewish home in Palestine still lived outside its borders. And Zionism, said Balfour, be it right or wrong, good or bad, is rooted in age-long traditions, in present needs, in future hopes of far profounder import than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land. There he is saying that the Jewish needs are far more important than the Arab needs. And that thought process is still going on today, because we haven't figured out this progressive trick in the origins of Israel, specifically. The many drafts of the Balfour Declaration were made in London and passed back and forth between the British and American War Office channels, and Brandeis was central to its final drafting. See here, this quote is pulled here. The draft cabled from government to government was handed to the Brandeis regime for its approval. After a most necessary revision, President Wilson, acting through Colonel House, who was in full sympathy with the Zionist aims, authorized cabling to the British government the version that was published, and to which all the Allied governments in turn gave their approval. So the final draft, the one that we've shown up top there, Brandeis regime had to sign approval for it to actually happen. Okay, and we can see the source here. The European history of the Balfour Declaration has to some extent been elucidated by Lord Asquith in his recently published memoirs. So you can go there, or I offer documents from British Foreign Policy 1919 to 1939, where they described the situation in the room when they cable, which we will get to. So below is Felix Frankfurter's, we're going to get to it right now, as a matter of fact. Below is Felix Frankfurter's alleged written account of the draft meeting that became Israel's founding document. From pages 1276 to 1278, documents on British foreign policy 1919 to 1939, Brandeis and Balfour, Eustace Percy, and Felix Frankfurter are the only 4 in attendance. Okay, that's 3 of 4 residents of the House of Truth. Brandeis, Percy, Frankfurter, they all know each other very well. They're hanging out at the political salon 1 mile from the White House years prior to this. So the 3 essential conditions set out by the justice show the same disregard then as we see today for the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Brandeis's first essential condition was that Palestine be the Jewish homeland and not just a Jewish homeland. He also claimed the need for economic elbow room to help establish a healthy social life and not merely a small garden. That meant control of the waters to the north and all territory east to the Hejaz rail line. His third essential condition was that the future Jewish Palestine must have control of the land and natural resources, which are at the heart of a sound economic life. And Mr. Balfour expressed entire agreement with the three conditions which the justice laid down. Balfour stating, "We are dealing not with the wishes of an existing community, but are consciously seeking to reconstitute a new community and definitely building for a numerical majority in the future." Outbreeding, outnumbering, these kinds of things is what they're thinking. Here we are 100 and something years past. Look what's happening. Balfour listens with much respect, giving the justice reassurances that he wouldn't screw it up while Brandeis continued on his European trip to Palestine. This is the one and only trip Brandeis makes to Palestine to put his own eyes on the situation. So he, Balfour, understood Justice Brandeis's request that no decision be taken as to the boundaries and the extent of control over the land in any way counter to his views until his return in about 4 or 5 weeks. He's pulling a Gino Ojic. He's saying, don't screw it up while I'm gone. Now that tells you who has authority. And, Rothschilds is very much probably under the control of Rothschilds too. I mean, the whole Paris Peace Conference happens on Rothschild land. A lot of the negotiations are happening on Rothschild property, as we show in that 3-part Origins of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Inquiry series. I highly recommend you go and check it out. So Brandeis, perhaps because of his standing as a most trusted personal advisor to the U.S. president, or perhaps because he was the leader of international Zionism at the time, or maybe because he was a U.S. Supreme Court justice, or maybe because Brandeis was an agent of the House of Rothschild, Balfour was subservient. At least that is how Frankfurter would have us believe. Note, Percy and Frankfurter, residents of the House of Truth, and Brandeis, its most honored guest, make up 3 of the 4 in the room when Israel was founded. Now, this gets deeper and even more amazing because when you go to the Paris Peace Conference, you can see that all of these guys are the inner ear for all of the big 4, where not all of the big 4, but they are steering all of it. So Brandeis, Frankfurter, Lippmann, or Frankfurter are in the ears of Woodrow Wilson. Eustace Percy is in the ears of David Lloyd George, the Prime Minister of Britain. And then another resident of the House of Truth that I'm probably not going to remember at this point is the ear of the Prime Minister of Canada there, Borden. So here's the actual documents I pulled. So you can zoom in and read those yourself. Again, we try to get as high resolution so you can empower yourself. I'm telling you, when you start to understand history, you can walk this earth a little bit more proud and a little bit more sure of where you're going and what your decisions are going to be made. So the night before Brandeis' election to the chair of the Provisional Executive Committee on General Zionist Affairs, he travels by boat with Horace W. Kalin, who introduces Brandeis to the idea of cultural pluralism or dual loyalty. Brandeis previously wrote disparagingly of hyphenated Americans who chose not to assimilate completely to American life, but now realizing their usefulness in supporting a Jewish homeland in Israel, completely flipped his viewpoint. So prior, he's saying that anybody that comes to America must assimilate to American tradition. And now all of a sudden, because of a boat trip with Horace W. Kalin on the night before being elected to the chair, he sees their usefulness, the utilitarianism of it all. He starts saying, okay, let's start promoting dual loyalty. So Brandeis immediately began writing about how every American Jew must become a Zionist. So let no American imagine that Zionism is inconsistent with patriotism. Brandeis. Now, patriotism is a very important aspect of progressivism, right? This patriotism allows us to look the other way when we're bombing backwards races from good, safe distances, or it allows us to look the other way when we see the never-ending growing debt clock or giant billion-dollar or nearly trillion-dollar defense budgets. We look the other way because it puts food on our table. How this is a giant contradiction we must get over. We must align our lives contradictory to death, mayhem, genocide. We must orient ourselves towards nature, natural law, and what we're supposed to be doing as human beings. There is no inconsistency between loyalty to America and loyalty to Jewry. Brandeis. Kalin and Brandeis together established the Parashim and Menorah societies at Harvard. Brandeis here prominent in the creation of 2 Zionist secret societies on the university campus. A U.S. Supreme Court justice, as odd as it sounds, it's true. In Kalin, we see one of the main influencers of Brandeis. Kalin, the one who introduces Brandeis to dual loyalty on a boat trip from Boston to New York the night before Brandeis was elected chairman of the Executive Provisional Committee on General Zionist Affairs. We conclude here that Louis D. Brandeis is the most influential historical figure in the creation of the country of Israel. And after seeing this, I'm not sure you're going to get much debate. He's creating the physical infrastructure of brick and mortar. He's signing the official documents that basically charter it. And he's working with the Rothschilds. And he has final say. Brandeis' ability to, 1, establish the necessary official documents, the Balfour Declaration, while 2, applying the real, tangible brick and mortar infrastructure for the early settlements, while 3, leading the FAZ, ZOA, AGC, and Provisional Executive Committee to gather massive support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine, all while being the 4 most trusted advisor to a U.S. president, places Brandeis' influence almost beyond that of the House of Rothschild. Obviously, a very effective tool of the trade for the Rothschilds, right? The elites that are steering all this. Brandeis, he's so high in all of this that and so connected back to Jacob Frank and the French revolutions and all of this Illuminati stuff that it's hard to say that he isn't as high in sort of the hierarchy as somebody like Aldous Huxley, or even probably higher. One of the most effective tools of the trade that the elite have ever seen is Brandeis. So Brandeis' use of dual loyalty as a persuasion tactic still thrives today. In our follow-up article, Brandeis Part 4, which is going to be tomorrow, Christian Dispensationalism and the Social Gospel, we show how Brandeis successfully inspires American Christians and Christians around the world to support the Zionist movement. We introduce the reader to who both Louis Brandeis and Benjamin Netanyahu call the real father of Zionism, a Christian dispensationalist, William Eugene Blackstone, Blackstone's one of the first founding families of Boston. And the article ends somewhat amazingly, showing how Brandeis further influences the Christian movement through his son-in-law, who just happens to be the father of the social gospel, Walter Rauschenbusch. So this is a combination of Christianity with socialism. This is how they infiltrated every form and aspect of our society, from Hollywood movies and entertainment to the intellectual world, to our education system, to religion, military, all of it. So again, here's our footnotes. Okay, it's an impressive list of footnotes. And then I've added some more provenance here. I encourage everybody to read through a lot of that. Obviously, the more we know about the origins of Israel, the better. This appendix showing that the Rothschilds were there, calling it an experiment as early as 1887, and it shows sort of the early settlements. 2 Rothschilds in the land of Israel, Simon Schama. Now, you can go onto archive.org, internet archive.org website, and anything that's out of print will be there, basically. Everything that I've found, everything that I've ever needed. There might be 1 or 2 books. Sometimes they'll limit your view. It'll still be there, but if you can use keywords and you know what you're looking for, they'll open up pages for you. But this one is open for everybody's interpretation and consideration. Just go to internetarchive.org and put in 2 Rothschilds and the land of Israel. Okay. Here's the plate. This is, I think, where we end. Yep. Okay, an actual historical artifact talking about a talk that he had in her dress at the Waldorf Astoria, the Brandeis Centennial Dinner. Okay, and you see those quotes coming on that we talked about, and they're going around the plate. Okay, so that's an amazing aspect to Louis Brandeis. Hopefully, you guys, that impacted you the way it's supposed to, because now we know a lot about Brandeis and his early Frankist origins, and we're showing how influential he is in the creation of the Federal Reserve, the Federal Trade Commission, the administrative state, and the control of all three branches of the U.S. government. But here he is establishing Israel and American Zionism. And honestly, there's not much more I can do. We just need everybody to see this and recognize its importance, okay? So I strongly encourage everybody to share these videos that I'm doing, share them with your family members, because we're standing on truth here. We've got primary source documents. We're showing the actual reality. We're showing what everybody has been kept from, okay? So if you've made it this far, I appreciate your time and effort. I appreciate your interest on our work here, and most importantly, this history, because it really has nothing to do with me.